Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. This week my supporters on Patreon voted for Fire Lord Zuko as our commander. This 3 mana 2/4 has Firebending X, where X is Fire Lord Zuko's power, and whenever we cast a spell from exile, or whenever a permanent we control enters from exile, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So that will also in turn enhance Fire Lord Zuko's Firebending ability. So there's a lot of different ways you can build around Fire Lord Zuko. This build did not focus too much on the firebending synergies. Instead, we're trying to get the most out of the +1/+1 counter ability by playing a whole bunch of spells that put cards in exile, that in turn also provide a bit of card advantage. And then we also have a nice adventure package. There's some other mechanics that will end up putting cards in exile, so we can enable Zuko and grow the team. So then taking a look at our deck breakdown, I've split it up into a few different categories, starting with some mana acceleration, because we might need to replay our commander a few times and pay the commander tax, and having more mana also plays well with all these effects that exile cards that we only get to play temporarily, so then if we have more mana available, we can make use of those cards in exile. Then we've got a healthy amount of removal. We also have some adventures that can double up as removal spells, but those got their own category. And then the largest section by far are all these effects that can put cards in exile, so we can get some card advantage while also enabling Zuko and putting +1 counters on the entire team. And then, as I mentioned, adventures are also great with Zuko, since you can play them from exile, triggering it in the process, and there are also often creatures that can benefit from those +1 counters. Then we've got some ways to protect Zuko, cards like Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes. And then our miscellaneous section also includes a few token makers that also play well with Zuko, because if we can first go wide and then put +1 counters on the entire team, we can deal a lot more damage. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, it's pretty straightforward. We've got the Terminus, which we can occasionally harness as well, otherwise all the signets and talismans in these colors, as well as Relic of Legends, since we have a decent amount of legendary creatures that can also maybe tap to make a mana. Then our removal includes all the classics, Swords to Plowshares, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt and Burst Lightning can also maybe take advantage of the firebending mana, as we can still play them at instant speed, same with Abrade. Otherwise we also have a Get Lost, which can deal with enchantments and planeswalkers alike. Bitter Triumph also answers both creatures and planeswalkers. Terminate, a nice instant speed removal spell that can take care of any creature. And then we have a Rowan to deal with artifacts and enchantments, Toxic Deluge as the most efficient board wipe, and can also maybe grow our creatures large enough to survive our own Toxic Deluge, so it can be more of a one-sided board wipe. And then Chandra is also great, can play it maybe on turn 3 thanks to our many signets and talismans, and then it can also make extra mana, and the first +1 ability can also maybe help us cast spells from exile, so that can also trigger Zuko's ability. Then we get to the real exile cards, starting with Ragavan, even have some good removal to clear a path, so it can hopefully connect, make some treasures, and maybe even cast some spells from exile. Then there's Thalia, which can flicker stuff when it attacks, so that can also help trigger Zuko. The Dream Devourer is also particularly synergistic, because we can now foretell cards by paying 2 mana, and we can even foretell at instant speed, so we can maybe make use of the firebending mana from Zuko to put some cards in exile, and then on a subsequent turn we can play those foretold cards at a 2 mana discount. The Devourer also gets 2 additional power until end of turn whenever we foretell. Then there's the Abbot of Carol Keep, not a card we want to play on turn 2, but much better later in the game once we have more mana available, so we can play it, exile the top card, and even play a Lance from exile or cast spells if we have the mana for them, while triggering Zuko. The Daredevil, a 2/1 first strike that can ideally exile a cheap instant or sorcery from the opponent's graveyard that we get to cast, hopefully enabling Zuko in the process. Then there's Inti, can discard cards so we can give an attacking creature a +1 counter and trample until end of turn, and then whenever we discard we get to exile the top card that we get to play until end of turn. Party Thrasher, a 1/4. At the beginning of our first main phase we can discard a card to exile the top 2 that we get to play until end of turn as well. Then You Find Some Prisoners is an instant, can either destroy an artifact or exile the top 3 cards of an opponent's library, and then we get to choose one that we get to play until our next turn, so that can also take advantage of the firebending mana. Then Lelia, the Blade Reforged, a 2/2 with haste. When it attacks we get to exile the top card of our library that we get to play until end of turn, putting a +1 counter on it in the process. Then Infamous Cruel Claw, 3/3 Menace. If it can hit the opponents, we get to maybe exile the top card of our library until we exile a non-land card, and then cast it by discarding a card from our hand instead. So that will also trigger Zuko. Sword of Forge and Frontier, one of our 3 equipment, gives +2/+2, protection from red and from green, and if we connect, we get to exile the top 2 cards that we get to play until end of turn, as well as play an additional land. Then there's a Gonti 2/3 Death Touch that gets to look at the top 4 cards of an opponent's library, exiling 1 face down that we get to cast, fixing our colors in the process. And then the 5 mana version from the Spider-Man set, a 2/3, gets to exile 2 from the top 9 instead. Then Outpost Siege, a 4 mana enchantment with a cans mode, gets to exile the top card at the beginning of each upkeep that we get to play until end of turn. So this one's a little easier to cast than the recently printed Count on Luck, which is triple red. Then we've got the Legend of Heroku, exiling the top 3, get to play those until our next turn. Then on Chapter 2 we get an extra mana, and then it transforms into Avatar Heroku. We've got Prosper, which can also exile the top card each turn. If we play a card from exile, doesn't matter from which ability, we also get to create a treasure token, so that's another nice form of mana advantage and card advantage all in one. Then we also have the Showdown of the Skalds, exiling the top 4 that we get to play until our next turn. Then there's the Dracosaur, which triggers at the beginning of our upkeep, exiling the top 2, potentially making some treasures and dinosaurs in the process, and we get to play those cards from exile as well. Dragonhawk, very similar, can also trigger when it enters or attacks, gets better the more 4-powered creatures we control. Then Quintorius, with a Discover mechanic, can also enable Zuko, and whenever we cast a spell from exile, Quintorius deals 2 damage to each opponent, and we gain 2 life. And then the Trumpeting Carnosaur lets us discover 5 when it enters on a 7/6 Trampler, or instead we can pay 3 mana and discard it from our hand to deal 3 damage, so that could also take advantage of Zuko's firebending mana. And then the Inner Sun will now make all our spells uncounterable, and at the beginning of our end step we get to discover 5, so that can also repeatedly enable Zuko. And then finally Outrageous Robbery, an X spell that we can sink a bunch of mana into to exile the top X cards from an opponent's library, and then we get to play those including lands, and then spells also get to fix their colors similar to Gonti. And then we've got our adventures with the Giant Killer, destroying creatures with power 4 or greater, and then it's only 1 mana to play from exile to trigger Zuko. The Shield Breaker, an answer to artifacts. We've got Bonecrusher Giant, just a great individual card, can first deal 2 damage and then a 4/3 afterwards. And then a Kellen can use its adventure to find an aura or equipment. We have 3 equipment in the deck it can find. We already saw Sword of Forge and Frontier. There's the Lightning Greaves for Shroud and Haste. And then there's also Embercleave, which is a great way to make use of Zuko's firebending mana, as we can cast it at instant speed. And then there's a Decadent Dragon, can also maybe exile cards from the opponent's library, so has additional synergy there. And then a 4/4 Flying Trample that can make additional treasures. There's a Virtue of Loyalty, can make a 2/2 Knights, and then the 5 mana enchantment can also pump up our team and untap them. And Virtue of Persistence, also a solid removal spell for 2 mana, and the 7 mana enchantment can give us some graveyard recursion. And then our protection effects include Ephemerate, since exiling and essentially flickering a creature can also enable Zuko. This one also has Rebound, so it can also maybe enable some nice enter the battlefield abilities. We've got the Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes to protect our key threats, as well as Lightning Greaves. And then our miscellaneous cards include Esper Sentinel, which also plays well with the extra counters it can get from Zuko, as that will also increase its tax. There's Ajani going wide with an extra cat token, and then we can also maybe transform it into the Planeswalker, and we'll have plenty of red permanents to deal damage with a 0 ability. Then Pi is one of our better cards here, as it can keep making additional Thopter tokens whenever we play something from exile, and then those Thopters can also start picking up more +1 counters. And then Anim Pakal can also help us go wide with more Gnome tokens. The more +1 counters it gets, the more tokens it generates. And then we mentioned Embercleave. The mana base is pretty straightforward. Couple utility lands here, Haiganjo for removal, Arena for haste. The Monastery also has good synergy with Zuko, letting us exile the top card of our library that we get to play until the end of our next turn. And then we've got some good mana fixing, Surveil lands in each color, besides shock lands that we get to fetch up. And then of course Cavern of Souls can also make our commander uncounterable. So that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, facing Rowan. So a black-red life loss deck can be built as kind of a storm combo deck. My hand is keepable, but yeah, it's not perfect. Gonna go turn 2, Talisman into Giver of Runes. And then want to play Zuko before I play Abbot. Now Ragavan on 1. I probably have to just stomp. Because if I try and block it with Giver and they remove it, we keep falling further and further behind. So then I'm not guaranteed to play Zuko next turn. Although probably wanted to have Giver in play first anyways. So Talisman into Giver. At least it can immediately tap for white. And maybe next turn we can try Zuko. Opponent had the Lightning Bolts, would not have been good enough for Zuko. But I'm sure they'll have some black removal spells that can take care of it. So if our opponent taps out for Rowan, maybe I should just use Toxic Deluge while I can. Does have 2 toughness. Opponent's gonna play Signet first. And an Outpost Siege could be fun. Yeah, Zuko's just not gonna survive here. I'll just play the Relic. And then next turn I could maybe look into Zuko and then I can still tap it for mana right away. Crusader. Ooh, this is perfect into Rowan, so now Deluge for 2 can take care of both. Cannot play Zuko alongside it. Would have been able to with a land. So nice 2 for 1. And then Giant Killer could also answer Rowan if they replay it. They briefly considered leaving it in the graveyard, so possible they have a Reanimate in hand. Rowan's back. Find a Daredevil, so could Daredevil get the Lightning Bolt back? I think I prefer using Giant Killer, since that's maybe the least reliable answer. And we can still cast it, or I can leave it in exile for Zuko. I think I cast it. Already have a Bone Crusher waiting in exile. Innocent Blood gets the Giant Killer, so that could have soaked up removal for Zuko as well. And then a Stormforged Armor. Alright, that's pretty scary. Did find a land at long last. There's also an Urborg in play. So I can play Zuko and then immediately play Bone Crusher Giant. That seems decent. And then we've got 2 enchantments for additional card advantage, so we don't mind playing a longer game. Ooh, a Runescar Demon can tutor up whatever they want. Probably one of the Necro enchantments to take over. Now Daredevil can also go for Innocent Blood and deal with the demon that way. And Infamous Cruel Claw to draw. So if I want to play Daredevil plus Innocent Blood, I essentially have 3 mana left if I tap Zuko. Don't have any instants I can cast with a Firebending mana. So yeah, Cruel Claw seems fine. Can also, I guess, tap Cruel Claw itself. That's better. So you play Daredevil, exile Innocent Blood, and grow the team in the process. And get a nice attack in. Opponent with a One Ring for protection. Already used our Bone Crusher. Otherwise, Stomp is a way to get around the protection from the One Ring. But this is a good turn to deploy one of our enchantments. And then I can still tap my Legends for mana. Opponent's still gonna feed this swarm anyway. Also could have answered an Outpost Siege. And draw a land. So, since we drew a land, I maybe go for Outpost Siege. Otherwise I would have gone for Showdown. Could also play Abbot first. Maybe see what we exile. find a land. Okay, so then I can play a land from exile, get more counters, play the siege. And choose a cans mode. So no real reason to attack, not going to use the firebending mana. So yeah, we'll see. I'm currently out of answers for Rowan, but it is 7 mana to replay. And it's gonna be the Pompous Pillager for 6. Okay, opponent back up to 18. And Felia could be a way to exile it and kind of reset the counters. But yeah, gotta start with Showdown. And then I can still play Talisman and maybe something afterwards. Okay, Kellen. Kellen can get Embercleave, so that should be game here if I don't mess up. So, play Talisman, play Summits. Get some more triggers. Use Kellen's Adventure here, making sure to not tap Zuko. And get Embercleave. And attack all out. With the firebending mana, I can easily cast Embercleave on whichever creature my opponent tries to block. So then with a double strike, they also don't gain any life. So unless they have a free removal spell like Snuff Out, I could Embercleave on Zuko to play around Snuff Out, but then they can Snuff Out the Abbot and I don't necessarily have lethal, so I don't think I bother. Just put it on the Giants. Alright, sweet. Oh, that was a satisfying ending to this game.
That's rough, buddy.
Okay, we're on the draw, facing Hei Bai, so 5 color shrines. Hand is keepable. Start with Godless Shrine. This enters untapped if we control a plains, and can later also maybe provide some card advantage. Looking at turn 2, Talisman. Could also technically keep up Terminate, and then if they play Hei Bai, I can immediately destroy it. Mostly relevant if they have ways of flickering Hei Bai. Otherwise, I don't really care if they keep the 4/4 in play. So it's going to be a tap land, so no Hei Bai this turn. I can go Talisman into Zuko. Seems fine. And then if I tap carefully, I don't even have to pay life to this. And Zuko resolves. Okay. So next turn, we've got some options. Opponent was waiting on a Day of Judgment, so a more controlling build since they didn't run out any early mana elves. And we could have maybe guessed. I think I just run it back, even adding a Signet. So then next turn I'll have plenty of mana to maybe make use of Showdown. Opponent finally runs out Hei Bai, with maybe a mana up to flicker it. It's Sanctum of Stone Fangs. And a Jan Ether draw. So yeah, let's start with Showdown. See what we can find. Some goodies. Okay, so play Ragavan, play Arena, play Sword looks good. Could also think about the firebending mana. I don't think I'll make use of it this turn. but I don't mind attacking for 5. Opponent's blocking, so they might have a flicker effect here. Yep. So that'll get them another shrine. Shattered Heights can maybe deal with our creatures. And the Eternal Wanderer, another way to flicker creatures. But instead it's gonna leave us with Ragavan versus Hei Bai. Back to the command zone. And find a land. Okay, so for sure want to terminate Hei Bai, finish off Eternal Wanderer. Although to be fair, I could also equip the sword to get past it without necessarily having to terminate. Could also play a hasty Zuko through Arena. Let's see, 3, 4, 5. Got 9 mana total. So this would be my last turn to play the Land from Exile. But I think I would rather just play Zuko and equip the sword. So they don't get the opportunity to replay Hei Bai. And I'm also not necessarily overextending into another board wipe by playing a Janny. Alright, Binding could get rid of the sword, keeps going for Zuko. And then, yeah, Soul Herder, Flicker, Hei Bai. That was a reason to terminate it. Back to the command zone once again. It's probably not getting cast. And Sanctum of All, that's bad news. Now our opponent can just tutor up whatever enchantments they want. So, yeah, this is pretty rough. Could play a Janny, terminate the cat token, and then try to use the Planeswalker as well. Could finish off Soul Herder at the very least. Ragavan still has an attack with a sword, so those are all possibilities. Yeah, let's go for a Janny. Terminate the cats. And then I guess counter on, doesn't matter. This one has protection, so I can't target it. And then I guess I have to play the dragon first, because this picked up an extra +1 counter too. And then now I can finish off Soul Herder. And attack past Hei Bai. See what we get. I'm buried in the garden. Okay, I do get to play an extra land, and with the treasure I can cast it. So I can actually get rid of the opponent's Sanctum of All, so that's huge. Enchant the basic land just to be safe. Okay, so no free tutor anymore. And our opponent scoops it up. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Cloud, Naya equipment. My hand has some removal, could use more lands, but I'll try it. This could also hit an artifact, so can maybe take care of an important equipment. And then I can start by surveilling, since I need to make sure I find more lands. Opponent could have a mana elf, which I can still answer on turn 2. Freya, kind of the equipment mana creature. Okay. So we'll get a Theater to Surveil. Keep a Prismatic Vista. And then for now just Burst Lightning. Cavern on Human. And then I can maybe hang on to Prismatic Vista so I can Fatal Push with Revolt on a later turn. Also reasonable to play the Vista, but yeah, we'll eventually want double red for Chandra as well. So I didn't want to fetch a swamp with it necessarily. Although yeah, turn 2 Cub. Could also just play Zuko, but then I'm not guaranteed to necessarily play Chandra on the following turn. So let's just Fatal Push the Cub, play Backstreet, and then next turn we can go for Chandra, and then the Inner Sun could be something to ramp into. Sword of Feast and Famine. That's pretty good. And our opponent could technically equip the Plains as well. So what I could do is Chandra, make mana, and then answer the Feast and Famine. So a lot of removal from us so far. Trying to control the game. And then next turn we can maybe get the Inner Sun down, and turn after start leveraging Zuko. Opponent now ramping with Song of Seasons, kind of a weird Cultivate variant. So next turn they could play Clouds, and they'll have an Umezawa's Jite to immediately suit up, so that's problematic. Think I'm still leaning Inner Sun. The sooner we get it going, the better. Could maybe hit a creature that can get in the way.
You're going down.
Alright, Gonti's a good one. And what do we like? Fable's always good. Seems better than a Shadow Spear. So now Gonti is a perfect blocker for Cloud. So our opponent's going to get rid of it first. Do they have another land? And they do not, so just an attack from the Plains to contain Chandra and get counters on the Jite. So they can at any point shrink my creatures down. Okay, so couple options here. Probably still making mana with Chandra. And then I could go Zuko into Fable, get a counter on Zuko. And then next turn we can maybe start Firebending. I'll also get more counters from the Inner Sun. So yeah, that seems pretty good. As opposed to trying to answer the Plains, which will just come back.
Day.
They could use the GT counters to take care of the Shaman before it grows. That resolves. Okay. So now Cloud can enter, maybe suit up the GT. No, just the Plains attacking Chandra still. So they can give it +4/+4 here at the very least. A double block could be reasonable. If they have instant speed removal, I do get punished. So maybe we just let this one go, and at most they would be able to put Chandra to 1, which is fine by me. They had an Ember Cleave. So blocking would not have worked out. Now they can finish off Chandra, but that's okay. But yeah, now they also got a million counters on the GT with double strike, so they can still use those to mow my creatures down. So this card's a problem. Bitter Triumph gives us some removal, so that's great. So Signet can probably go, and Virtue seems a little slow here. Okay, so step 1, Maybe see if I get to attack. Could use a firebending mana. Or I can wait to see if they play Cloud, if I want to maybe take that out instead with a Bitter Triumph. But yeah, they could take out the Shaman token before I get a treasure. Which is what they'll do. So yeah, my objective is probably just prevent our opponent from getting more GT counters next turn. So I can play Relic. And then, yeah, if I play Prosper, I guess I'll be a mana short of Bitter Triumph. So probably just gonna pass. Found a Giver of Runes. Yeah, maybe going Prosper, keep up Bitter Triumph would have been slightly better. Now an Amulet. And Godzilla. So now I have to Bitter Triumph right away. And this one can also keep growing. So we've got our work cut out for us. And GT could take out the Giver. And Talisman's a draw. Also triggers Zuko. Can play Prosper next. And sure, we'll just run out Talisman. Could still attack for 6. But then our opponent could shrink it down. And still block. So it doesn't seem very useful. Alright, Pia's a good one. So we're starting to assemble a small army. But Godzilla does not mess around. 7/7 double strike with the GT. What if I take it? First strike damage, they get 2 counters. And then they can pump for 4. So that would be 18 damage total. So it's not quite lethal. But yeah, trying to block is just losing my creatures. 4 GT counters can take care of Pia. But yeah, we'll see what happens. They can also gain life with it. So they're essentially at 23 here. Animpakal, that's a card here. So can play it, play the land after to pump the team. Now sadly all my creatures are legendary, so there's nothing for me to activate Reflection on. Unless I were to, I guess, copy the Thopter, but that's not too exciting. So how much damage is this? We would also get 2 gnome tokens. So yeah, this looks lethal to me. Opponent's gonna gain life. Ooh, it looks like they have removal as well. Alright, never mind. And we have them with Xaxes here. Super close game. Probably messed up the turn where I played Relic instead of Prosper. So that could have maybe given me a few more resources a little sooner. But yeah, I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Karametra, green-white ramp. Got a few decent cards, swords, the protection from green is going to be useful, and then Pia can also maybe combo with Fire Lord Zuko, but yeah, no acceleration, no black mana. Sentinel's not going to be super helpful. I think we got a mulligan. This one still needs additional mana, but I'll try. We have 2 efficient removal spells. And then some nice sources of card advantage that can exile stuff with Zuko in play. So this needs to get a white-black surveil. Halflings attacking, so they're not making use of it just yet. So then we have time to take it out. Probably going to do it in their upkeep in case they're holding some sort of protection spell. Ember Cleave, I'm afraid, is not quite what I need here. Now Ragavan's tempting, but I want to slow the opponent down. And then may as well terminate, since Bitter Triumph can also hit Planeswalkers. That works. Triumph is also a bit easier on the mana, since we only have the 1 red source. So I could maybe Ragavan plus Triumph next turn. Okay, opponent keeping up 3 mana. They did take 3 damage, so they've got something they want to cast. Not sure what it is yet. So, could just go for Zuko, maybe get that removed. That's okay. Next turn we can play Prosper, since I don't know for a fact that I'll be able to use Bitter Triumph. Otherwise Ragavan would have been quite tempting as well. I see Antish Restoration, just to get an extra land. That's fine. So next turn they could cast Karametra, which is indestructible. But it's also not going to be a creature just yet. Now this could be a deck with a couple board wipes in it, since they play well with an indestructible commander. And there's Karametra. But then again, if they want to make use of Karametra's ability, they need lots of creatures. So I think I still go for Prosper here. Outpost Siege may be a little safer in the face of a sweeper, but Prosper can generate additional mana, which we kind of need here. So we'll go for the highest upside play. And this is a sorcery, so yeah, no real way to use the firebending mana. So now with the Greaves, next turn I could maybe go Ragavan, play the Greaves, get some counters, and get an attack in. Although never mind with Defense of the Heart, we do not want to go wide. Want to keep my creature count at 2 if possible. And yeah, we could do that. So, do I still play the Greaves? I would get a treasure. Yeah, I don't think we need the Greaves, I would rather play the Siege. And then go for the cans mode. So that's basically like having another Prosper. Our opponent had the swords. So now I regret not going for the Ragavan line, but of course our opponent would not have used the swords if I had 3 creatures in play. So now at least I can afford to play another creature out. Oof, a Reclamation Sage. That feels bad. Also could have blown up the Greaves. So had I known, I would have used it as bait. So yeah, now we lost both our sources of card advantage in 1 turn cycle. So that hurts. If I find another red source, we have Dragonhawk to maybe find more action. Arena of Glory is pretty nice. Could even give Dragonhawk haste. There's also Kellen, which could get one of my equipments. I guess at this point the only one left is the Sword of Forge and Frontier. Pro Green is still pretty useful. So those are all possibilities. But yeah, I think Dragonhawk without haste, because I can use my arena to make mana next turn. And then try to keep my creature count at 2. Opponent's at 12 as well, so they don't have a ton of life to spare. Ooh, but now Avacyn, Angel of Hope, which is indestructible and gives other permanents indestructible. And it also turns on Karametra. Well, that was unexpected. Now, we do have a Toxic Deluge, so I could deal with Avacyn if I Deluge for 8. It's also gonna wipe my own creatures away. But yeah, maybe that's still necessary. Attacking, I guess, still triggers Dragonhawk, so that's worth it. And yeah, casting Deluge for 3 is not enough to take out Avacyn, because then it would basically be a 5/5 indestructible taking 5 damage, which obviously doesn't take it out. Okay, so go to my main phase, and then Deluge for 8. Back to the command zone. Can play Ragavan and then Adventure Kellen. And get the Forge on Frontier. Alright, opponent also lost Karametra. But they top decked another god, God Eternal Oketra. Can only get past it with a sword, but I can Bitter Triumph, probably discarding a card at this point. So Kellen says, other creatures get 1 extra power for each aura and equipment attached to Kellen. So wouldn't be irrelevant right now. So yeah, Bitter Triumph, discard a lands. Now Oketra goes 3rd from the top, so if I attack with Ragavan, they get a little bit closer to redrawing Oketra. But I think it's still worth it, since I can use the treasure. Also can't forget about Arena of Glory. And Luminous Broodmoth, that's a card. Yeah, that could just be my second creature. And then get to watch the beautiful animation. Does Oketra have reach? She does not, despite a huge bow. Wow, one top deck after another here. Ragavan comes back with a flying counter, but immediately dies yet again. And yeah, opponent's got an Elish Nord in play now. Oketra coming up, so can't catch a break. I can still play and equip the sword. Hit for 3, hope to get something useful. Yeah, I don't think playing Zuko accomplishes much. So this is instantly dying. If I make a knight, would still give me access to the 5-mana enchantment later. Yeah, I don't think I'm casting Virtue of Loyalty this game. So I'll go for a Signet, and yeah, I'm basically at 2. And I need to come up with 4 more damage here. Yeah, those were some pretty good draws. Avacyn, Broodmoth, Elish Nord, Oketra. A Braid is 3 damage. That's not gonna save me. I can of course still play defense with Fire Lord Zuko. I don't have to attack. So yeah, let's say I stay back to chump. Zuko dies, comes back with a flying counter. So that would be somewhat useful. But then it still doesn't have any power. So I think my best hope is just hitting something juicy off the sword trigger. Alright, let's hope for the best. A land. Alright, I think they got us. Can play Zuko. Play a land. Yeah, Kellen just dies on the spot, so it's not going to survive Ilishnorn. So there's nothing I can really do here. Can move the sword. And then still die. I guess I get to play an extra land as well. But yeah, again, there's no window for me to save Kellen, despite having the extra +1 counters available. Yeah, just needed one more turn here, as it turns out. But the 2 attackers will get the job done. So, a rare circumstance where a Braid's not the removal spell we want. GG's. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Rofellos, so we absolutely need some cheap removal. This is not going to cut it. This is better. Can make red once we play the plains. Burgeoning from the opponents. Alright, so this says when an opponent plays a land, so if I fetch one up, it doesn't trigger an additional time. So then I can potentially bolt on turn 1 already. And if they don't play Rofellos, then I can maybe surveil. But yeah, that's gotta go. And Ryan can also get an extra land. So we'll get the red-black. Now I could keep up Stomp, or I can play Talisman. They're likely replaying Rofellos, but in case they don't, I may be better off developing my mana. Opponent does not have land 4 somehow. Okay, that works for me. So then now I could play Zuko first. Opponent can sack the Dry to get a land, but yeah, Burgeoning, if you don't have an effect to draw a ton of cards, it's not always super exciting. At least with Exploration, you can combo it with I Still Explore. But I have seen Burgeoning do some pretty disgusting things in a Tatiova deck, where Landfall can draw you extra cards. Can be Spelunker for 3. So we'll see if it's still within range of a Stomp, otherwise Sword of Forge and Frontier is a solid option. Opponent keeps a Cultivator on top. Okay, so in that case, could play Sword Equip and get an attack in. That seems fine. Can maybe hit some extra lane drops that I can play. Although I could also consider playing more creatures so we can go wide to fully take advantage of Zuko's ability. Not gonna use the Stomp. Save it for Rofellos. And these sadly will go to waste. Alright, but now we have a protection from green creature. So that can keep attacking. Although Acidic Slime can blow something up. Could have gone for the sword, so I'm surprised they didn't. Opponent just wants to go for the land destruction. And now Anim the draw. So if I play Anim, I'll get an extra counter here. So that could be worth it. Even though I don't get to see what I exile first. Could also go Talisman into Anim, which maybe makes more sense. And don't trust Auto Tapper. So then I'm just hoping to exile 2 lanes with Zuko. Could also consider stomping the Acidic Slime now. But then I'm out of answers for Rofellos. Maybe this is still okay. Since with the sword we get to dig for more answers. Alright, once again hit 2 cards that I couldn't play. So we haven't hit any lands yet with the sword. Alright, now we draw 1. So I can play Bone Crusher for starters. And then attack, maybe play Abbott's second main. Could have also considered moving the sword onto Anim. A land Carnosaur, so I can play Abbott, and then still play the Triome probably. Fatal Push. Alright, I guess I'll just use a Fatal Push instead. And get some more counters. And at this point it doesn't matter if they play Rofellos. And I guess, yeah, we also get to play an extra land, I forgot, with the sword. So our opponent seems very dead. Great Henge. And an explosion. So we get to see this Mardu Zuko deck in action, and yeah, there's a few different ways you can approach the deck, since it does pull you in a few different directions. Did not go all out on the firebending synergies in this build, so often the mana ended up going to waste. Could potentially address that by adding more instants and big red spells you can cast using that mana, but then again, if Zuko keeps getting removed and you never get to attack with a lot of firebending, then you never get to see those synergies in action. At least by focusing more on the exile synergies, the deck is still functional without its commander, but if we do get Zuko in play, of course, things get a lot more exciting once we get all those extra +1 counters. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me today. Wanna thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.